In 480 BC, 300 Spartans and 700 Thespians stood in a narrow mountain pass, blocking the largest army the world had ever seen. For 3 days they held. On the fourth morning, they were dead to the last man. The Persian king Xerxes had brought 1 million soldiers to enslave Greece. He failed. But here's what nobody tells you. The Spartans weren't the heroes of that story. They were slavers fighting to preserve a system so brutal, they had to terrorize their own population to maintain it. The Athenians, who claimed to invent democracy, owned more slaves per person than almost any society in history. And the golden age that gave us philosophy, theater, and the scientific method lasted exactly 50 years before the Greeks tore themselves apart in a war so vicious, it effectively ended their civilization. Let us understand how a collection of constantly warring city-states produced the intellectual foundation of the entire Western world, why they destroyed themselves at the peak of their power, and how their victories and catastrophic failures still define how we think about freedom, reason, war, and what it means to be civilized. Ancient Greece is everywhere in your life. The words democracy, philosophy, theater, politics, all Greek. The architecture of your government buildings, the structure of logical argument, the idea that citizens have rights their rulers must respect. And yet, most people's understanding of Greece comes from cleaned-up textbooks and Hollywood exaggerations. What they miss is the violence underneath it all, the slaves who made the leisure for philosophy possible, and the fact that Greek civilization didn't fade gracefully. It committed suicide, using ancient sources including Herodotus, Thucydides, and archaeological evidence from across the Mediterranean. We're going to reconstruct ancient Greece from its Bronze Age origins through its catastrophic collapse. We'll see the world before Homer, walk through Athens at its absolute peak, stand at Thermopylae, and watch the Peloponnesian War destroy everything. This is 2,000 years compressed into 30 minutes. I hope you enjoy. To understand why Greece became what it did, you need to understand what it lost. For over 1,500 years before the Athens of Socrates, before the Spartans at Thermopylae, the Aegean Sea was home to civilizations more advanced than anything that came after. On the island of Crete, the Minoans built palaces 4 stories tall with indoor plumbing, flushing toilets, and painted frescoes covering every wall. The palace at Knossos had over 1,000 rooms. These people had no city walls, no fortifications. They didn't need them. Their wealth came from trade, not war. Meanwhile, on mainland Greece, the Mycenaeans built fortress cities with walls so massive that later Greeks believed giants must have built them. Mycenae, Pylus, Tyrans. Warrior kingdoms ruled by kings who lived in palaces, controlled the economy, and kept detailed records on clay tablets in a script called Linear B. These weren't the Greeks we think of. They were literate, centralized, organized around royal power. They traded with Egypt, with the Hittites in Turkey, with cities across the Mediterranean. Then around 1200 BC, it all burned. We don't know exactly why. Earthquakes struck across the region. Mysterious invaders called the Sea Peoples appear in Egyptian records, destroying cities from Greece to the Levant. Trade networks collapsed. The palaces went up in flames. Within a single generation, nearly every major city in the Aegean was abandoned or destroyed. And when survivors tried to rebuild, they couldn't. The kings were gone. The scribes were dead. The knowledge of how to write disappeared completely. Greece entered what historians call the Dark Ages. For 100 years where the population crashed, cities emptied, and the material culture reverted to something close to the Stone Age. The Greeks of this period left almost nothing behind. No writing, no monumental architecture, no art worth mentioning. For 4 centuries, the most advanced civilization in Europe forgot how to read. But here's what matters. When the Greeks finally reemerged around 800 BC, they had forgotten they'd ever had kings and palaces. That forgetting changed everything. Out of those dark ages, something unprecedented emerged. Not an empire, not a kingdom, something the world had never seen before. By the 8th century BC, a new kind of community had emerged across Greece. The polis, the city-state, not a nation, not an empire, but hundreds of independent cities, each controlling the farmland around it, each with its own government, its own army, its own laws, its own coinage. They shared a language. They worshipped the same gods. They competed in the same athletic festivals, and they were constantly at war with each other. There was no Greece in the sense we understand nations today. There was Athens, controlling the region of Attica. There was Sparta, dominating the southern valleys of Laconia and Messenia, ruling over a massive population of enslaved people called Helots. There was Corinth, Thebes, Argos, each a power in its own right. And because Greece itself had limited farmland and a growing population, these cities sent out colonies. By 550 BC, Greek settlements ringed the Mediterranean from Sicily to the Black Sea coast, from southern Italy to the shores of North Africa. The economy ran on agriculture, trade, and slavery. War captives became slaves. People who couldn't pay their debts became slaves. Children born to slaves became slaves. Every major Greek city depended on this system completely. And as trade networks reestablished themselves, as wealth began flowing again, social tensions grew. Aristocratic families owned the land and controlled the government. But the men who actually fought the wars, the hoplites, heavily armed infantry, who bought their own bronze armor and fought in tight formations called phalanxes, these men were farmers and craftsmen. They would die in battles to defend cities where they had no political voice. By 650 BC, this system was creating intense pressure. The men fighting in the phalanx were dying to protect a system where aristocrats made all decisions. Something had to give. What gave were the aristocrats themselves. Across Greece, strong men called tyrants seized power, often with popular support. Pisistratos in Athens, Cypselus in Corinth. The word tyrant didn't mean what it means today. These men weren't necessarily cruel. Many were reformers who broke the aristocratic monopoly on power, redistributed land, and gave common people a stake in government. They ruled without legal authority, but they ruled because the people preferred them to the old families. Two cities took radically different solutions to this crisis. Their rivalry would define Greek history and eventually destroy it. Athens chose reform. In 594 BC, a statesman named Solon canceled all debts, banned debt slavery, and reorganized society based on wealth instead of birth. If you had money, you had political power, even if your family name meant nothing. Then in 508 BC, a politician named Cleisthenes went further. He created something called democratia, ruled by the demos, the people. Citizens voted directly on laws, on whether to go to war, on who should be exiled from the city. It was the most radical political system the world had ever seen. But there was a catch. Citizen meant adult males with Athenian parents. Maybe 30,000 people out of a population of 300,000. Women couldn't vote, couldn't own property, couldn't speak in public. And the economy ran on slaves, possibly over 100,000 of them. Athens invented democracy while owning more slaves per person than almost any society in history. Sparta chose terror. Centuries earlier, Sparta had conquered the neighboring region of Messenia and enslaved its entire population. These slaves, called Helots, outnumbered Spartans 7-1. Every aspect of Spartan society was organized around one goal: controlling the Helots. Spartan boys were taken from their families at age 7 and raised by the state. They trained for war until age 30. Spartan citizens were forbidden to farm, to trade, or to work. Their only job was to train for war and keep the Helots terrified. When a Spartan boy turned 18, his final test was a krypteia. He was given a knife and sent into the countryside to hunt and murder Helots. The goal wasn't military training. The goal was terror. The legendary Spartan warrior culture wasn't about bravery. It was about keeping their slaves too frightened to rebel. Spartan women, unusually for Greece, had significant freedom. They could own property, were educated, and trained physically. But only because Spartan men were so obsessed with military control, they needed their women to manage everything else. Both cities were experiments in how to organize human society. Both were built on foundations of brutality they refused to acknowledge. Athens celebrated equality while depending on slavery. Sparta celebrated courage while living in constant fear. And in 499 BC, a rebellion on the far edge of the Greek world lit a fuse that would force these rivals to unite or die. To understand the scale of what Greece faced, you need to understand what Persia was. The Persian Empire was the largest empire in world history to that point. It stretched from Egypt in the west to India in the east. It had professional armies, paved roads connecting distant provinces, and a government structure more sophisticated than anything Europe would see for another 1,000 years. Persia controlled 44% of the world's entire population. Greece, by comparison, was a collection of tiny, constantly fighting city-states on the empire's western edge. Persia barely noticed them until 499 BC. Greek cities on the coast of Asia Minor, part of the Persian Empire, rebelled. Athens sent 20 ships to help. The rebels burned Sardis, the Persian provincial capital. The revolt was crushed by 494 BC. But Persian King Darius I had not forgotten. He decided to punish Athens. In 490 BC, a Persian force landed at Marathon, 26 miles from Athens. The Athenians marched out with their hoplites, heavily armored infantry, and did something insane. They charged. Persian archers couldn't stop men in bronze armor running at full speed. The Greeks shattered the Persian line. Persia lost 6,400 men. Athens lost 192. A runner named Phidippides ran the 26 miles back to Athens to announce a victory, then collapsed and died. The Marathon race is named for this battle, but Marathon was a raiding party, not the main invasion. Darius died in 486 BC. His son Xerxes inherited the throne and spent 4 years preparing the largest military expedition in ancient history. The Greeks knew it was coming. An Athenian politician named Themistocles convinced Athens to use a silver mine discovery to build 200 warships, sleek triremes powered by 170 rowers each. In 480 BC, Xerxes came. He built a bridge of boats across the Hellespont, the narrow strait separating Asia from Europe, and marched his army across. Ancient sources claim 1 to 2 million soldiers. Modern historians estimate 200,000 to 300,000. Either way, it was the largest army Greece had ever seen. The Persian navy numbered between 600 and 1,200 warships. Xerxes' goal was simple: conquer all of Greece, burn Athens to the ground. In August 480 BC, Greek spies watched that army approach. Most Greek cities surrendered immediately. The terrain gave them one chance: a narrow pass in the mountains where numbers wouldn't matter. They sent 300 Spartans to hold it. The pass at Thermopylae was 15 meters wide at its narrowest point. King Leonidas of Sparta commanded 7,000 Greeks. 300 were Spartans, 700 were from the city of Thespae, and thousands more came from other cities. The plan was simple: delay the Persians long enough for the main Greek army to mobilize. In a narrow pass, Greek heavy infantry had every advantage. Numbers didn't matter if you couldn't bring them to bear. For 2 days, the Persians threw wave after wave at the Greek line. Every attack shattered against bronze shields and long spears. Xerxes lost over 10,000 men. The Greeks lost handfuls. On the night of the second day, a Greek trader named Etealtes showed the Persians a mountain path around the pass. On the morning of the third day, Leonidas learned he was surrounded. He dismissed most of his army. He kept the 300 Spartans and the 700 Thespians who refused to leave. They fought to the last man. Here's what nobody mentions. The Spartans weren't heroes volunteering for suicide. Spartan law forbade retreat. If Leonidas returned home alive, the Helots might see that Spartan warriors could run. He fought to the death not for Greece, but because going home alive would unravel the entire terror system Sparta was built on. The Persians marched south and burned Athens to the ground. The population had evacuated to the island of Salamis. The Greek fleet, 370 triremes, was trapped in the narrow strait between Salamis and the mainland. Themistocles sent a fake message to Xerxes saying the Greeks were about to flee. Xerxes ordered his fleet to attack immediately, forcing his 600 ships into the confined waters. In September 480 BC, Xerxes sat on a golden throne on a hillside and watched his navy get destroyed. Greek triremes had bronze rams on their prows. In narrow waters, the heavier Greek ships tore the Persian fleet apart. 300 Persian ships sank. The Persian fleet was crippled. Xerxes retreated to Asia, leaving his general Mardonius with the army. The following year, for 79 BC, a combined Greek army met the Persians at Plataea and destroyed them. Mardonius was killed. The Persians were expelled from Greece permanently. Greece survived. Against all odds, the tiny divided cities had beaten the superpower, and that victory destroyed them, because now they had to decide who leads Greece. Athens had the fleet. Sparta had the reputation. Neither would back down. In 478 BC, Athens formed an alliance called the Delian League to protect against future Persian attacks. Member cities contributed either ships or money. Within 20 years, that alliance had become an Athenian empire. When the island of Naxos tried to leave in 470 BC, Athens crushed it. When Thasos rebelled in 465 BC, Athens besieged it, tore down its walls, and took its fleet. In 454 BC, Athens moved the lead treasury from the island of Delos to Athens itself and started spending the money on Athenian building projects. The allies had no say in this. Under the leadership of Pericles from 461 to 429 BC, Athens reached its peak. An assembly of 6,000 citizens voted directly on every major decision. Athens introduced pay for jury service, allowing poor citizens to participate in government for the first time. And Pericles launched a massive public building program. The Parthenon, built between 447 and 432 BC, was the finest temple in the Greek world. It held a 12-meter statue of Athena made of gold and ivory. The columns were slightly curved, so they would appear perfectly straight to the human eye. It was built with money taken by force from cities that had no choice but to pay. This was Athens' golden age. Sophocles, Euripides, and Aristophanes wrote plays still performed today. Socrates walked through the agora teaching young men to question everything. Herodotus wrote the first history. Hippocrates founded medicine as a science. All of this was possible because slavery freed Athenian citizens for leisure and intellectual pursuits. In the same decade Athens built the Parthenon, it slaughtered every man on the island of Melos and enslaved every woman and child for crime of staying neutral. The city that invented philosophy used that philosophy to argue might makes right. Sparta watched Athenian power grow with increasing alarm. In 464 BC, a major earthquake triggered a massive Helot revolt. Sparta asked Athens for help, then changed its mind and sent the Athenian soldiers home. A deliberate insult. The alliance that had defeated Persia shattered. By 435 BC, Athens controlled the sea. Sparta controlled the land. Their allies hated each other. And Greek political theory said two great powers cannot coexist. One must destroy the other. The question was never if they would fight. The question was when. In 431 BC, a minor dispute between two insignificant cities gave them the excuse they'd been looking for. The war began over nothing that mattered. Corinth, a Spartan ally, fought Corcyra, an Athenian ally. Both sides mobilized. Sparta invaded Attica, the farmland around Athens. Pericles had a strategy. Abandon the countryside, pull everyone behind Athens' walls, and use the navy to raid the Spartan coast. Athens was supplied by sea through the long walls, fortifications connecting the city to its port. The plan was to outlast Sparta. Without risking a land battle, Athens would lose. Then in 430 BC, plague struck. Overcrowded Athens, packed with refugees from the countryside, was hit by an epidemic that killed between 75,000 and 100,000 people, roughly a third of the population. Pericles himself died in 429 BC. Leadership passed to less careful men. The war escalated. When the city of Mytilene revolted in 428 BC, Athens debated killing every man and enslaving every woman and child. They settled for executing only the leaders, about 1,000 people. When Plataea surrendered to Sparta in 427 BC after a 2-year siege, the Spartans executed 200 prisoners. In 416 BC, Athens offered the island of Melos a choice: submit or die. The Melians chose neutrality. Athens killed every man and enslaved every woman and child. The historian Thucydides recorded what Athens told them: the strong do what they can, and the weak suffer what they must. This is Athens, birthplace of democracy, speaking. In 415 BC, Athens sent a massive expedition to conquer Sicily. Over 200 ships, more than 30,000 men. The siege of Syracuse went disastrously wrong. The entire expedition was destroyed. Over 7,000 Athenians were enslaved and forced to work in stone quarries. Most died there. Meanwhile, Sparta made a deal with Persia. Persia would fund a Spartan fleet. In exchange, Sparta would hand over the Greek cities in Asia Minor, the cities they had fought Persia to liberate 70 years earlier. The alliance that stood together at Salamis was now partnered with the enemy they had died to defeat. In 405 BC, the Spartan fleet, funded by Persian gold, destroyed the Athenian navy at Aegospotami. In 404 BC, Sparta besieged Athens. The city starved and surrendered. The walls were torn down. Democracy was abolished and replaced by an oligarchy called the 30 Tyrants. The war lasted 27 years. It killed a quarter of the Greek male population. Athens lost its empire. Sparta won but bankrupted itself. And Persia now controlled the Greek coast again. Everything they had fought for at Marathon and Salamis was gone. Thucydides, who fought in the war and wrote its history, said he did it so future generations would learn from it. He called it possession for all time. We're still reading him. We're still not learning. Ancient Greece gave us democracy, philosophy, science, theater, the Olympics, and the idea that human reason could understand the universe. We literally cannot think about politics, ethics, or logic without using their concepts and their vocabulary. The words we use to describe government, the way we structure arguments, the belief that citizens should have a say in how they're ruled, all Greek. And they build it all on slavery. They preach moderation while committing genocide. They invented rational debate while slaughtering each other in pointless wars. Athens, the city that said all citizens are equal, owned more slaves per person than the American South before the Civil War. Sparta, celebrated for military discipline, was a police state built on terrorizing an enslaved population 7 times its size. Here's the question historians and philosophers have argued about for 2,500 years. Does the good they created justify the evil it was built on? Can you separate Athenian democracy from Athenian imperialism? Can you love Socrates while knowing society that produced him also slaughtered Melos? Or is it something more uncomfortable? That the same culture that creates philosophy might need enemies to define itself against? That the freedom to think requires someone else doing the labor. That democracy and empire might not be opposites, but two sides of the same coin. Because here's what I find fascinating. We still build our governments on Greek models. We still teach Plato in schools. We still quote Pericles' funeral oration about democracy. But we almost never mention that the same man who gave that speech also turned the Delian League into an empire and crushed anyone who resisted. We celebrate Marathon and Thermopylae while forgetting Melos. We admire Athenian democracy while ignoring that only 10% of Athens' population could vote. Drop your answer in the comments. Can you admire civilization's achievements while condemning its atrocities? Or does the blood stain everything? I'm not looking for agreement. I'm looking for your actual opinion. Even if it's unpopular, should we still hold up Athens as the birthplace of democracy? Or should we teach it as a warning about what democracies become when they build empires? I read every comment. I'll see you in the next one.